Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of It's Not Rocket Science with me, Lindsay Setchell, all about horse and hoof care. So today we're going to talk about, let me get my pen up, today we're going to be talking about the anatomy of the hoof. Now we've talked about the basic anatomy of the hoof, but today we're just going to look a little bit beyond the basics. Now I've got a whiteboard here, right? I've got a whiteboard here. So I'm not going to be able to do incredibly accurate diagrams. You know me, you've seen my diagrams. But I think what I'm going to show you will really try and explain and transpose what you're looking at when you're thinking about the horse's foot, and especially when you're looking at it from the side, and also how that transposes to what's underneath. So without further ado, let's get into it. Let's just rub out my rocket. So we're going to look at anatomy, but this time a little bit beyond basics, because I think it's important that you, as I said before, are able to visualize what's going on inside the horse's foot and then transpose that to what's underneath. So let's use green and let's draw our horse's foot. Here we go. So this part here, just looking at the side view, we've got the heels, we've got the toe, we've got the coronary band, which should be at a nice angle. The angles change, but it should be at a nice angle towards the ground. It shouldn't be horizontal or even inverted where it's going up. It should be at a nice angle going towards the ground. But this vertical height, of course, shouldn't be too high either. So how do you know exactly where you need to be? Well, by looking underneath the foot. And you're looking at the solar plane, and that's what tells you where everything is, where the balance needs to be. If you go back and you check out my last It's Not Rocket Science lesson from last Saturday, you'll find we talk about dorsopalmar balance and how important it is, and how we talk about that heel height and this vertical height is not determined by what we think it should be. It's determined by what's going on underneath the foot. And it really isn't difficult. It's quite simple. Right, so what about when we're just looking at the foot like this? Well, when we've got a healthy foot, we should have the toe pillar on the ground, and we should have the heel on the ground, and we should have the maximum amount of surface area. We've talked about this before. There should be a nice arch in the foot here. This is normal and natural. That is how horses' hooves are. They have a natural arch. Unfortunately, when we put shoes on them, when we put permanent fixtures to the hoof, they're usually flat because we have to nail them in. And when we nail them in, we need to have an area that hasn't got a big gap, obviously. Now that's a big problem for the horse because that means that they can't have their natural wear patterns. So let's just get rid of these nails for the moment. So let's have a look inside the foot. So up here we have a little bone called P2, and part of P2 is in the foot and part of it isn't in the foot. And then connected to P2 we have at the distal interphalangeal joint, which is the coffin joint, which is this bit here, we have P3, and P3 comes down like this. It turns, it's a bit pointier than that, it comes up here, comes down and sort of is in that shape when we cut it in half. But this, when we cut it right down the middle of a foot, imagining this is cut right down the middle, what we call a sagittal section, cut right down the middle. You can't see the wings of the pedal bone, P3, you can't see those palmar processes. So what we're looking at here is the center of P3, if you like. And up here we have the navicular bone sat just there. So there's 2.5 bones in the horse's foot. We've got P2 and we've got P3 and we've got the navicular bone. I put a little N in there. That's it when it comes to bones in the horse's foot. And then everything else is built around that. So we have what we call the deep digital flexor tendon, which comes in here. Now stick with me if you know this anatomy, because we're going to transpose this onto the sole in a minute. So we have the deep digital flexor tendon, and then up here, the bit that most people forget about is we have what we call the extensor tendon, which comes up here and attaches here. So this is the extensor tendon, and this is the deep digital flexor tendon. And that deep digital flexor tendon attaches to the underneath P3, and the extensor tendon is at the front of P3, at the what we call the extensor process. These two tendons work together. One flexes and one extends. We're not going to talk about that right now, but then they both need to be functioning normally for the foot placement and for comfort and for everything to work correctly. So then we have the part of the frog that we see, which is here, which is just set back from the tip of P3. And then we have just underneath here, underneath P3, we have the actual corium of the frog. What do I mean by corium? That's the bed of the frog, the home of the frog, where the frog grows out from. And it grows out in that kind of angle. So that what we see from the outside is not exactly the position of the base of the frog, where the frog is growing from, where the frog horn's growing from. That's set back just a little bit along here. And then underneath the frog, so this is the point of the frog that we see on the outside, and then underneath all of this, we have this amazing structure which is connected here. And this is called the digital cushion. The digital cushion. And this digital cushion, as you can see, takes up quite a large proportion of the horse's foot. So if we were to mark this up, and let's use red, we could say, here's the toe, the true toe. Now this often gets taken off. We're going to look at that in a moment. We could say, here's the tip of P3. Obviously, these lines aren't absolutely accurate because I'm drawing on a whiteboard, so they're not perfectly accurate. This here is the outside of the frog that you see. This is the inside of the frog, the base of the frog stay, the layer that has all the blood vessels that the frog horn grows out of. Here we have the navicular bone, just there. Here we have the heel, and here we have the bulb. And these are all areas that we can pinpoint on the bottom of the horse's foot. So let's draw the sole. Let's get that in here. So we're drawing the sole of the horse's foot. This one's quite round. So let's just look at this for a moment. Here are our bars, and that's where the true bar ends. And then around here is the hoof wall. And this is divided into two, the inner and the outer hoof wall. Apologies about my diagrams. This is the basics of what you're going to look at when you look at a healthy foot underneath. Now what we can do is we can look at this healthy foot, we can see the frog, we can see the bars where they end, they're not overgrown, we can see the hoof wall, we can see the sole and the heel bulbs. Those are the things that we should be seeing. A nice wide frog, this part of the frog all not contracted. It has a slight little dip here, which is just a tiny little dip right in the middle of the frog, and that's normal. That increases surface area so that when the horse puts his foot down, that frog has movability, flexibility. If that frog becomes contracted, then this often becomes deeper and deeper, this what we call the central sulcus of the frog, and that ends up getting very sore, can easily get infected, and can become very, very thrushy. So this is what a normal healthy foot should look like. So let's just transpose what we've seen here onto this foot. So let's take this and go up here. Let's go across there. That's the toe. And that's really, really important. It's what we call the toe pillar along this area here. Now, depending on your horse and depending on their own wear patterns, their main toe pillar of support will be at some area just around the center of that toe. And they all have it. They all have a toe pillar. And it's incredibly important for feedback when the horn tubules are sending back feedback messages to those papillae to tell the hoof to grow more. And so it's very important that we have that. And then when we have that feedback correctly in place, we also have good growth patterns from heel to toe here. And when we interrupt those, which we're going to look at in a minute when we take that foot and make it pathological, we'll see that in fact what happens is we interrupt those growth rates. And so then we start to have problems, which we've talked about before. Let's look at this area here, which is the tip of P3, which is around about here, just in front of the frog, not right at the very end. When we do workshops, we ask owners to come and mark the foot, and they mark up the foot, and then we ask them to cut into it. And invariably, the point that they finally find P3, where they remember these are cadaver hooves, where they finally crunch into P3, is approximately, and we'll say approximately, a centimetre in front of the apex of the frog. The apex that you can see. Now that varies. The frog can be slightly overgrown or not. The tip that you see here isn't usually the bit that's right connected to the sole. It's further out, which means that if you took that right back, the distance to here would be slightly longer. But what we see in general on cadaver hooves that we cut into, this is what we see from cutting into this area here. Not from a sagittal section, but when we're chopping back what we call notching. So that's the tip. That's the tip of P3 there, just around about there. So let's take the point of the frog that we see now. Well, that is there. That's the frog. That's the apex of the frog. But like I've just said, that frog apex may or may not be overgrown a little bit. So when you pick up the horse's foot, you don't go in and carve the frog and shape it and try and make it look like this triangle. You have to be a little bit more realistic and sensitive to the horse, because this frog is made up of different layers, and it's really, really easy to go straight through that outer layer that isn't particularly thick, but thick enough for the horse to be comfortable. And then you can start causing little sore spots in the frog. And that will stop the horse from loading properly at the back of the foot. So we've now got the toe pillar, the tip of P3, and the frog apex. Now here, look, we actually have the true dermis, the true area of where the frog grows from. Okay, now that's actually, you can't see that, and you'll never see that from the outside. Everything in the horse's foot grows slightly forward, and the horn of the frog exits the sole around about here, because the sole has thickness, it has depth. If it didn't have any depth, then you'd see it all the way back here. But as that sole increases in depth, that's when you see the outside of the frog. So there we have the true frog apex, which is the dermis, where all the blood vessels are. And now we've got the navicular bone. We've got this area here, sorry about this. And then we go up here and we can put it in that region there. And this is where navicular bone is. Now the thing is with navicular bones, when this area gets very, very sore, because inside you have problems going on, and it's not the bone that you have the problems with, it's everything else that's around that bone, what we call the podotrochlear apparatus, and this whole area which we call the enthesis organ, but we don't need to look at that today. I've done another, it's not rocket science on that. The problem that you have is this area becomes sore, and so that usually is coupled with this area, the frog, not being as wide as it should be and being contracted, which means that the horse does not want to load the back of the foot, which then means it's going to load the toe area more. And that comes with a whole host of different issues, especially if the toe area is being removed. Now we're going to look at the heel, and that's here. These here are the heels, and the heels are little triangles. And all of that triangle should be on the ground, level with each other. We see an awful lot of people doing beveling and rockering heels. They rocker them inwards like this, they rocker in, and they rocker down, just the heel. And so they're taking portions of that triangle, which isn't very big, they're taking portions of that triangle and reducing that size. There are loads of reasons why they do this. The excuses, we'll call them excuses, but they justify doing them, which is to widen the back of the foot. That's not going to help. Trying to force the foot to widen is not going to work. What you have to do is bring health back to the foot, trim it correctly, let those heels land correctly, and then this area here, which is the soft tissues around the frog and the digital cushion, then that area there is then going to expand a little bit. It's going to get healthier. The horse is going to load the back of the foot when this is not in pain anymore, and then the whole foot begins to get healthier. You can't just force an animal that's already in pain to have a wider frog. It doesn't work anyway. And if you rocker it back, a lot of the people you hear talking about taking half of the heel back, and there's not very much heel anyway, will tell you because they're trying to encourage a heel first landing. A natural landing for any ungulate is flat, whether it's a horse or an even-toed ungulate like a cow. They land flat. They don't land heel first. Four-legged animals don't, except the elephant and occasionally the bear, of which the horse is neither. So we've got the heels in place, and now we have the bulbs, which are here. These are the heel bulbs. The heel bulbs. Now those heel bulbs are important, just like every other part of the foot, because underneath this frog, in exactly the same position as this, is this big digital cushion. And this digital cushion, when the fetlock comes down from up here and the pastern area comes down, which presses on the navicular bone, which pushes into the DDFT, which then ultimately presses on this area here, which has lots of little nerves in it. If this is sore in any way and the horse can't load, if this digital cushion is puny, if it's underdeveloped, it's immature, the horse can't load properly. And then, of course, we go along, we put shoes on and we think we've fixed the problem. But in actual fact, we really haven't. We've just added to the issues. Okay, so those are the landmarks that you can imagine when you're looking at the side of the foot. And if you've ever been and had an x-ray done, you can even see these areas. You can't see the soft tissues. You can see the bone in the outline of the hoof wall, but you can't see the soft tissues. And then you can imagine where those actually are on the foot. So let's now have a look at what's pathological. Let's just rub this out. So I'm going to draw my pathological hoof in red now. So now this hoof has got a big heel. It's flat because it's not been allowed to have its natural passive and active wear patterns, and the coronary band is pretty much horizontal. So immediately, without even imagining anything else, we can see this foot has problems, because this coronary band shouldn't be like that. As we know, it needs to be at a nice angle. It isn't. It's practically horizontal. We can see that the heels are very high, and we can actually see that the dorsal area, the front of the foot where the toe is, isn't actually any higher than the heels, or has no more vertical depth than the heels. That's a big problem, and that should be a really big, scary warning sign. We've taken the toe off. And in fact, the toe used to be, let's just take the arrow out of the way, the toe used to be down here. So this would have been the horse's natural pillar of support, and this would have been the heel, but unfortunately the heel has come down and underrun. So the heel is here now. So the natural heel is back here, and the toe pillar is over there, but we've taken all of that off. So now we have a new pillar of support, which is on the sole, which we've talked about before, and that's a really big problem. So now we have this surface area as opposed to this surface area. People freak out about long toes, but what they're not understanding is that they're not long in this plane. They're not long vertically. They may look long horizontally, but the more you take that toe off, you reduce your balance point. Go and look at that. It's not rocket science on dorsopalmar balance. And therefore you start to reduce sole depth underneath here. That has incredible drastic consequences for P3. So let's draw P3 in now. So we're going in, we've got P2. And now we're going to draw P3 here. And what has happened to P3 as it is that it has lost a great portion of its tip. Its tip used to be here, but that's gone through a process called osteonecrosis. That means bone death. Why is it bone death? It's not because of diabetes or because of laminitis or because of high blood sugar levels. This is happening because of pressure points that are put here. Pressure points because the toe is being brought back all the time and the horse is now trying to produce a lump here, which many of you will have seen, which we call the toe callus, which is not a natural thing. Toe calluses shouldn't be there, but when they are there because you've removed the toe, you've got to leave them alone until eventually that toe wall gets down to the ground, hopefully increasing that vertical height, and then eventually, naturally, that toe callus will just disappear. But we've had pressure underneath here for so long that P3 has been pressing down because of the angle of the heels pushing down onto that area. This sole is reduced and reduced and reduced. You can see P3 once upon a time used to have, I'm not going to draw it in because it'll be all over, it will have lines everywhere, but P3 used to have a hoof capsule that covered it once upon a time, and now it's not there anymore. It's not there because it just disintegrated. It's not there because the hoof care professional who had no balance point just started removing it because they didn't know where they were going. And it's true, the hoof care world never follows the natural constants of the horse's foot, and so consequently they get themselves into all kind of hot water, not knowing where they're meant to be trimming to and balance point. Eventually, when the horse is so sore, they put a shoe on and think they've fixed the problem, and matters just keep getting worse and worse and worse. So this poor horse has got osteonecrosis. Not only has he got osteonecrosis, but here's the coronary groove, which is where the hoof wall grows from. Here's the hoof wall, which is being thinned up here. So it's getting thinner. If you were to carry on, it would be non-existent. And then what we have is that attachment between P3 and the outer hoof wall has just got wider and wider and wider. This isn't because of diet and management. People will tell you that laminitis occurs, that the stretch of the laminae occurs because a systemic problem, systemic inflammation. That did not cause this. That did not cause that stretch. What caused that stretch is incorrect hoof care. They will tell you, if we put the navicular bone in here, they will tell you that the DDFT here is pulling P3 through the capsule. It's actually impossible for it to do that. And one of the reasons we know that is because of the place of the frog. So the frog, which is sat just behind the tip of P3, which we know now because you've seen it and you know where it is on that diagram that we showed you before, which I'll put another one up in a minute. The apex of the frog that you see from the outside, that P3 didn't just go whistling that way beyond the apex of the frog because it's attached to it. The true dermis, the true frog stay, is attached to the horn frog that you see, which is attached to the sole, and it absolutely cannot move. What moves is the hoof capsule because the heels are allowed to grow, the toe is chopped, and that causes P3 inside to move. So you have pain, 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 pain. You've got pain in this area here. You've got pain over here in the navicular bone, in the joints. You've got pain in the DDFT. And of course, up here in the extensor tendon, you've got pain there too. Pain everywhere. And this digital cushion, which is down here, that is in big pain too, because it's all weak. It's been squashed. This area here is all being squished and squashed and pushed up, which is pushing up this coronary band here, which should be at this angle, which would mean that this would be in a much healthier position. This foot is now in deep trouble and has been in deep trouble for a while. And you'll hear owners say, oh, my horse has had another laminitic episode. It had another relapse. It got sore again. It gets sore. This is because when we trim a horse like this, and let's go back and mark that out, in fact, because it just looks like a load of lines now. So when we trim a horse's foot like this, we have a huge amount of problems going on inside the foot, and it keeps growing. It doesn't stop growing. It's not a static thing. When you take an x-ray, go along and take an x-ray in another 2 weeks, it won't look the same. It's not static. This is growing all the time. It's what we call dynamic and organic. And all of this is feeding back to everywhere in the horse and the brain. All of these tissues that are under inflammatory processes, all of this is agonizing. And this is all too common. Does diet and management play a part? Oh, it surely does. Absolutely. It plays a huge, huge part in inflammation. And you see, the trouble with inflammation is it's very difficult when it kicks off to control. And you have chronic and you have acute inflammation. And when diet and management is wrong, when this is wrong, you have this chronic, destructive inflammation going on all the time, which flares, and it flares up. And what we do in the Phoenix Way and what we teach is not a method. It's about following the horse's natural constants so you don't get yourself into this mess, because it's a hoof care professional problem. They tell you it's that. They tell you it's the owner. It isn't. This is the person trimming the foot who has put this horse into this position. So then you start giving them the wrong diet and management. You're giving them too much grass. You're giving them loads of bag feeds, supplements they absolutely don't need, total hypernutrition. And then all of this gets more inflamed, because this inflammation, which is going on throughout the entire body, is affecting the feet as well. Coupled with the fact that the foot keeps growing and this keeps getting more and more distorted, and tipping it over the edge and coming back a little bit at a trim, and tipping it over the edge and coming back a little bit at a trim. This is why horses relapse. This is why horses dip in and out. And this is a massive warning sign for you that these animals are under massive stress. And that stress releases copious amounts of cortisol, which causes insulin to be dysregulated, which then means that when you go and test these animals for EMS, etc., they've got high insulin levels. And so when you then sort the diet and the management out, you finally go, right, I'm going to make this as species specific as possible. I'm going to stop this inflammation happening. You've then got a chance of lowering the inflammation in the foot. And then you have to help the foot to find itself again. And that's where experience with good pros come from. And we teach owners to do this too, but it's tricky for them when they've never picked up tools before. And they're faced with a very distressed animal that can't walk. Then we realign and we resort this foot out and grow it better over time, help the horse grow it better over time. And then finally you have a better situation where the horse begins to heal. So let's just go and transpose this like we were doing on the other foot and look at where all of these areas now are. So I'm going to draw these now in blue. Now we have the chopped off toe. We had the original toe, but we've now chopped it off. We have the point of P3 here. We have the tip of the frog. we have the new underrun heels, and we have these bulbs. So let's take a look. Let's draw this in red, and let's look at this foot, which looks a little bit elongated now. And it's really quite, sorry about my drawings, it's really quite contracted at the back. And remember, underneath there, you've got the digital cushion. That's not being effective anymore. The back of this foot hurts because it's contracted. Let's just draw in the hoof wall. So we've got the hoof wall going around, and we're looking at this foot and going, hang on a minute, that kind of looks a bit weird because we've got this enormous gap here and here. That wasn't what it looked like before, because if we transpose this, let's do it with blue, and we go, well, the tip, the front of the toe is here, the toe pillar is there, but they've chopped it back to here because they've chopped all that area off, and underneath there now we've got a toe callus, which is a big lump because they've chopped that off. And what actually we have when we put the horse back into its correct position is we have what we call a lamellar wedge in here. And that's really important to leave alone, because that lamellar wedge is there because your hoof care professional, or whoever was doing the feet, was raising the heels. When you lower the heels, you start to see that lamellar wedge show itself as the sole finally finds where it needs to be, and you see this big wedge. And so what do? They come along and they chop it off, which is this here. They get rid of it. And you've just taken away not only the surface area, which might look weird and funky, but horses need it, but you've also removed the toe pillar. You've also caused the surface area to now be very short, here to here. It's a really short surface area when he had a much bigger surface area. And let's face it, they need as much foot as possible because the back of the foot's killing them. It's really painful. And now the front of the foot's really painful because they're losing P3, because now they're walking on their sole, which they were never meant to do. You're losing P3, you've got pain in the front of the foot, you've got all these areas here of laminae that are being torn and stretched because the heels keep going up, and you've got the back of the foot that hurts. It's no wonder that these horses try to rock back and forth, and when they're walking, look like they're walking on hot coals. They're not sick, essentially. They just have incredibly painful feet. So what about the tip of P3? Well, the tip of P3 is here, and your toe callus is trying to protect that. And then we go back and we look at the point of the frog. Well, the point of the frog is around about there, but it all looked very long and weird because it may be slightly overgrown here, but because this part of the foot has a wedge on it and it all looks out of proportion, it's okay. It's going to come back. It can come back because the horse's essential, real, natural foot is in there. It's still in there. It's just this all looks distorted, and distorted because of what we've done. We've then taken these heels and we've brought them underrun, okay, when they should have been back here. It's all there. In a really distorted, painful, problematic, suffering foot, all the landmarks are still there. It's just you can't see them anymore because they've become distorted. And it's the job of a good hoof care professional who knows all about the natural parameters of the foot to find those. You'll have big lumps of bar that are overgrown. In fact, so much so they may even continue to grow all the way around the frog. All of this area then just continues to compact until eventually what you have is you have compaction all along the back of the foot. This is in this scenario. Again, it's all to do with incorrect hoof care. And this is probably the biggest travesty that will ever be understood, that will ever hit the equine world, that has hit the equine world. We need to educate owners to understand this, because once they've understood this, they can hopefully stop their horse going through serious osteonecrosis, and they can bring their horse's foot back to normal. They don't get enough movement. They don't get correct hoof care. The diet and the management causes more problems. And on top of all of that, they have an owner who doesn't understand the basics. So I hope this lesson helped. I hope this It's Not Rocket Science anatomy, slightly beyond the basics, has helped you understand more. And I'm sorry about my scribbly diagrams, but I hope that's made you think a little bit more about positioning and natural trimming of the horse's foot. And when you don't do it, this is what you get. Okay, guys, I'll see you in the next It's Not Rocket Science lesson. Until then, I'm Lindsay Setchell. I hope you enjoyed it. Take care. Bye-bye now.